Welcome to Modern Musings, conversations with the maiden, mother, and crone, looking at ourselves and the world through the lens of the 21st century. And welcome back. I am Amber Garvin, and I'm here with my two cohorty co-hosts, Kristen Hessler and Cindy Murray.
Hello.
And, well, it's April now, and we are wanting to talk a little bit about National Poetry Month. April is National Poetry Month, and we wanted to talk a little bit about poetry if you didn't know what poetry was, and hopefully you do know what poetry was, or you were kind of paying attention in school, and you kind of hate poetry because your teacher didn't teach it right. Well, I'm a teacher, and my students love poetry because poetry is music.
Yeah.
You know,
if you listen to music, you're listening to poetry.
If you don't realize that.
Songs, you mean?
Yeah, songs.
Well,
not,
songs.
Not Mozart.
Particularly pop music, country music, anything with lyrics and verses.
Yeah, anything with lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, metal music has some good lyrics also. Don't discount metal music.
Well, this is true. Hey, I was a metalhead, so, you know.
Yeah, so if you like lyrics, you like music, and we just wanted to talk a little bit about poetry today, and we like to celebrate National Poetry Month in my classroom. I have I have Poem Day, and I like to have students perform a poem or a song, but they can't necessarily perform it like it has been performed before. And we do a lot of projects this month as well, usually centered around poetry. And then I like to make a bulletin board called Poem in Your Pocket or Pick Your Poem. And I put little pockets on there and I print out little poems. And I encourage kids to grab a poem and put it in their pocket when they leave the classroom.
Poems are, I think that's really awesome because poetry is really great food for thought. And a lot of people
Something
have
to chew on, yeah.
Well, yeah, it is. It really is. And a lot of people have this misconstrued notion that poetry is this really dry, they're thinking Emily Dickinson or Shakespeare or...
Shakespeare's not dry.
Well, no, but...
Wordy,
lofty, and...
Either romantic or sad.
Yes,
and
but
it has to rhyme.
Not related to their lives. And I believe firmly that there is poetry out there for everyone. You just haven't found it yet. And, there's simple, everyday layman's poetry. And we'll talk about some of those different kinds of poems a little bit later in the podcast. But, and as I mentioned, song lyrics are a form of poetry.
Yes.
Set to music. And
you could even say that Bible verses are poetry.
Actually,
Psalms,
many of the Psalms are actually
Poems.
Yeah. And so there's a lot to be celebrated in poetry, and don't have that narrow focus of I think that I shall never see.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be some epic thing. Poetry can be a few lines. It doesn't have to be 5 pages long. It doesn't have to be an epic poem like, say, the Odyssey.
I was just thinking that.
I love the Odyssey.
Maybe that's
it's my favorite epic
where
poem.
school has robbed some of us of the opportunity to enjoy poetry, because I remember learning the Odyssey. And
yes.
I transferred schools a bunch of times. Well, not a bunch of times, but several times. I went to 2 different junior highs. So I remember doing the Odyssey more than once.
Yeah.
And that's a long poem.
As a 9th grade teacher, I do the Odyssey every year. So I have read it
I love the Odyssey.
Millions of times.
Yeah. But I could see where some kids might get a little, weighed down by that because that's heavy reading.
Oh, it is.
Well, yeah, if
totally.
you read
And-
the whole thing, especially.
Well, and
Yeah.
I had an English teacher who loved Shakespeare, and we read
A lot of Shakespeare. I had
tons
that too.
of Shakespeare, and that weighs a lot of people down because it's hard reading. It's because it's not in a form of English that we speak.
Right.
you know,
and
it's,
That's where you kind of talk about it's a full course meal, not fast food. You got to
Yes,
sit
it
down
really
and chew
is.
it.
It really is. You have to sit down and chew it. But there and Canterbury Tales.
see, that's another
one.
form of English. Like the Odyssey is written in like Old English, and then
Well, actually, it was written in
Latin?
Greek
Oh,
or
Greek.
Latin.
yeah, and then it was written in one of the earliest forms of English, and more specifically, what was written in Old English would be Beowulf.
Yeah.
if you're thinking of epic poetry, because when I teach seniors, I go through the different types of English, and we have like a 9 weeks on the different types of English, starting with Old English, and then Middle English, which is Canterbury Tales, and then Modern English, which is Shakespeare. Renaissance English, it's considered modern English, guys. Did y'all not know that?
Wow.
But
it's not TikTok speak or text
it's
speak.
it's not American dialect.
No,
and that is. But there are lots of types of poetry that are, and as I mentioned before, there's more layman's type of poetry. A limerick is a form of poetry. A lot of you are familiar with it. It's a 5-line poem. It follows an AABBA rhyming format. And it usually starts something like, there once was a man from Nantucket who carried his...
something in
Bucket.
a bucket.
Yes.
I don't know.
Right.
So, and it ends with something that I'm not going to say on the podcast. So,
Oh,
everybody is very familiar with those. And that is actually poetry as well. So don't say you don't like poetry because everybody gets a giggle out of those. And I know a lot of kids are, and well, everyone is familiar with roses are red, violets are blue. Those are very simple forms of poetry.
Did y'all know that riddles are considered poetry?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
Oh,
cool. I
cool.
love riddles too.
Yeah, I do like that.
I like a lot of different kinds of poetry, and one of the things I was talking about the food for thought. If you have particularly modern poetry, very often speaks to modern issues. So if you take a modern day poem, it talks about angst, it talks about social issues,
mental health,
and things like that. And they're very often very deep, and like Kristen said, you kind of have to chew on it for a bit, take it around in your pocket like Amber's students, and think about it all day, because a lot of times you can get a lot of different things out of it the more times you read it.
Well, yeah, a poem is essentially a story. It's a genre of writing. It is a story, but it's written in elevated language using poetic devices, different types of devices, similes, metaphors. And of course, if you don't know what those things are, I'm sure you've learned them in school. Those are the two basic poetic devices or figurative language out there: similes and metaphors. Comparisons.
There was a whole bunch. I was actually looking on my phone because I was trying to remember certain type of ones that I was familiar with, and I was just like blown away at some of them. Like there was one I didn't even know, I'd never heard of before. Metonymy, did I say it right?
I believe it's metonymy.
Metonymy, thank you. Yeah, I
Thank you,
never
English
heard of that
teacher.
before. And Amber was like, yeah, it's kind of like a metaphor, but it's just one word. I was like, oh, cool, never heard of that before. I was curious of maybe like challenging myself to pick some of those and try to use them to grow my writing.
Well,
just in general.
they are really a great mental exercise. We talk about doing things to increase our mental capabilities or to keep our brain young, because that's what keeps us from developing dementia and things like that, and doing these things that challenge our brain, like reading hard readings, writing, having to think hard to write crossword puzzles, Sudoku. I don't even know how
Sudoku.
Thank you. I don't do that when I do the crosswords.
Those are number puzzles, but yeah.
But it does the same thing, you know. And writing poetry, reading and writing poetry does the same thing, because it's, you're challenging your brain to think outside the box.
It's linking different parts of your brain.
And it is linking different kinds of parts of your brain. You start thinking about how to describe an object in multiple different ways or from a different point of view. And those things, when you see things that way and you read things that way, you see the world in a different way.
Yeah.
And that is one thing, at least as an English teacher, that I try to teach kids in school, different ways to see the world. And I think that, a lot of that is getting lost nowadays, which, we've been talking about in past episodes of Eckhart Tolle, and he's pretty much saying the same thing, like the way people think is getting lost, and we need to change it and make a new earth.
Yeah, totally. So, Amber, you were going to share with us, I think you had a poem you wanted to share with us.
Oh, of course. And we were also discussing earlier One Little Word, and I was reading this poem to my cohorts, and Cindy said that it reminded her of One Little Word. And I know, like, it's one of my favorite African American poets is Langston Hughes. And a while back, Black History Month was a couple of months ago, and I taught Langston Hughes to my students. And I just wanted to read my favorite poem by him. And it's called Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? And I've always thought my whole life that this poem was very powerful.
I thought that was a great poem. And the reason I said it makes me think of One Little Word, because a lot of times when we're doing our One Little Word, or we're doing goal setting with our power sheets, and
you're talking about dreams and
dreams and goals and things, and the things that what does happen to your dreams,
if you let them go away.
Yeah, and that's a great visuals there with that poem, and I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah. And it's very rich with figurative language and poetic devices.
Yes.
For example, it has simile. Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet. It has repetitions and rhyming sun and run. So it's very full of literary devices, if you are a literature nerd like I am.
Yeah, and I like I said, I think it's a great one, and it's one of those that you can kind of turn over in your brain over and over again as you think about not necessarily the poem, but the message that the poem is getting across.
Don't let your dreams go.
Yeah, what happens to your dreams?
What happens if they go?
Right. And it makes you think about those things. And that's why I thought it was a good one, representative of something we might look at in One Little Word or something like that. And that's one of the things I love about poetry, is that it just kind of makes you look at things from another point of view. And, I've never thought about that. What does become of your dreams? What?
Yeah, if you don't act on them, what becomes?
And, I have dreams that I had when I was younger, And I've never, they still exist back there in my past, and I've never really looked at them and thought, is it a sugary sweet dream? Mm-hmm. Do I look back on it with fondness and go, that was such a cool dream? Or do I look up and did it just dry up and go away? Does it stink? Is it something that just festered and it drives me crazy because I didn't achieve it? And we all have dreams that probably like that. In all of those categories. So I think it's a great poem for that very reason. And, there's a lot of really cool poetry out there. And I am not, I'm not an English teacher. I'm not familiar with a lot of poetry. I learned what I learned in high school and college or whatever. And just little things that I've run across over, the course of my life. But
well, I don't know what actually fostered my love of poetry. I remember learning poetry when I was a little kid in school, and I remember writing it. I have poetry that I wrote dated back to like third grade, I believe. But I've always been fascinated with poetry and writing poetry, and when poems come to me, it's like I have to stop everything I'm doing and write them down. Yeah, put them out before they're gone. Like I have so many partially written poems in the notes on my phone. I have a book of partially written poems that I still need to get like the idea going. I have so many. When I used to work at Dillard's years ago, this was years ago, like 2005. Okay. I have so many, because I keep all those little scraps that I've written poems on, and they're in like a box. I have so many Dillard's pieces of paper and stuff like that
Receipts
that I wrote.
That I wrote them.
That I wrote at work. So I have a bunch of little scraps of poems that say Dillard's on them. It's kind of crazy. But, and I've just been, and I save every single one of the little scraps that I wrote poetry on. Maybe I'll make something out of it someday. Right now it's just in a box, but I've always been fascinated with poetry.
I have a very similar experience. I remember distinctly learning about poetry in fourth grade. And, we learned about limericks, and we learned about, roses are red, violets are blue, which I mentioned earlier. And, and we had to write poetry, and my mother loved to write poetry. So she would help me a lot with it, and everything. I don't remember, I loved reading the Odyssey. I loved reading Shakespeare and things like that. But I didn't really develop a I didn't go out and just seek out poetry on my own, though. But what I did do was I found myself writing poetry a lot that eventually turned into music lyrics. And as I became a musician, a singer and songwriter, my poetry turned to song lyrics, and I do a similar thing. I have bits and pieces of song lyrics, which, everywhere. And sometimes it's a chorus, sometimes it's a verse. They're just totally unfinished.
So for me, I'll just relate this to something you guys can understand, because y'all obviously don't have a hard time writing poems. Words just pop in your head and you start writing them down and put them on scrap paper. I'm like,
anybody can write a poem.
I know anyone can. But so, have you ever stared at a blank piece of paper or canvas and you're like, I want to paint and I'm itching to paint, but I don't know what to paint about? And when I was in school and we had to write a poem, I felt like I didn't know what I wanted to write about. Like, my mind was just empty. And I have ADD, and there's things going in and out.
Your mind is never empty. Yeah.
90 thoughts a second or something like that. That's legit in my head. I couldn't think of a single thing. I couldn't commit to anything.
That's what it is. You can't commit.
Maybe.
And the trick to that, and Amber will probably tell you this is just start writing.
Yeah,
write down a word.
Y'all tell me this when we're like trying to write blogs for the podcast.
Oh, I do it all the time.
Yeah. I can write a paper. Follow the format. 3 paragraphs and a beginning and an end paragraph.
So
this is something, right?
So this is how I start my students with poetry. And there are many different types of poetry that we've been talking about, and I can talk about simple types of poetry, but I always start with imagery, and that is descriptions using the 5 senses. Mm-hmm. So I have them describe their favorite food using their 5 senses. Mm-hmm. And then I tell them afterwards, I said, well, you just wrote a poem. I even started out for them. I taste, and then they have to fill that in. I smell, I see, I touch, I hear, and they have to fill that in. And then I have them title it, if it's pizza or whatever.
Why were you thinking pizza too?
Because everybody loves pizza. So, if it's pizza or whatever. And then I have them go back and read it. And I was just like, did you not just write a poem? Because they'll be like, I can't write a poem. And I'll be like, yes, you can.
I'm totally going to write a pizza.
Okay, this this leads right in, though, to something I wanted to bring up with one little word. Here we go again. I know everything goes back to one little word for me, always, I think. But
Eckhart Tolle.
So last year, I did one little word, and one of the prompts, the instructor who did the prompt that month did poetry. She's a poet. And so she wanted to get everyone to write poetry. And so one of the things that she had us do was write a poem using a Mad Lib format, which is very much like what you just did.
Oh, it's the easiest way.
So she had this little form, and it said, I am, and you fill in the blank. And then you had to describe this, and she would, say an adjective that describes whatever. And it was all these things, and it wound up having, you filled in the blank and you described yourself, basically, in this one, because we're talking about one little word, and we're looking at ourselves through the lens of poetry on that.
Yeah, that's called an I am poem, by the way.
And so we did that, and then she encouraged you. You don't have to use it exactly in that Mad Lib format. You can take it and rearrange those parts as well. There are no rules in poetry.
No, absolutely not.
That's the thing. There's no rules. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to rhyme. It doesn't have to have meter. There are no rules. And so
people think that there have to be rules when they're writing
poetry.
or
they
like
think
Kristen,
that everything has to rhyme.
Thinks that I don't know what to say because I've got to rhyme. I don't know what to say because it has to be a type of meter, but it really doesn't. You can write a free verse or freestyle poem.
Right. Well, I never even got that far. I just couldn't think of any subject matter worth writing a poem about, I guess.
Yeah, I wound up writing a couple of poems, and I really enjoyed the poetry that I wrote for this one little word. And I'm going to share those on my blog later this week, the 2 poems that I wrote, and talk a little bit more. And I may have a challenge for you as well. I may put together a little Mad Lib type
you should, and put it in our downloads for readers. That way, also, if you haven't checked the downloads for readers lately, I have added my SMART goals form if you haven't checked it lately.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
It's a good time
Is that linked on your blog?
It's linked on my blog,
okay.
Yes.
Very good. Very well. So we'll link it again on this week. If you haven't been on the blog, every week when we discuss things on the podcast that are visual items or linkable websites and things like that, we always run a blog post the same day called Heard It on the Podcast, and we will link all of those items or downloads or whatever there. So you can go there and find that.
We also
so if
have
you're
some
listening, it should be there now
for you to check out. You know, we also have we'll have some websites like Poetry Foundation for you to check out if you want to look into more poems as well.
Yes.
And then I know, like on my blog, I'm going to talk about my poetry, but I'm also going to talk about blackout poetry, which is something that's near and dear to my heart.
I'm excited about that one because
we're also going to do a video, or we're going to upload a video.
People do the blackout poetry, and it's really cool. So how do you get started doing blackout poetry?
Oh, blackout poetry is a lot easier than you think. Basically, you can take pretty much anything like a newspaper or a magazine. I wouldn't do magazine. They have a lot of pictures, but newspaper's great for blackout poetry. Or magazine pages with a lot of copy, like or
an old book.
Old book, yes.
Yeah.
That I am currently
or a new book.
Yeah, or a new book.
If you're a destroyer of books.
I recently went to the big half price books and I got some books to destroy on my blackout poetry project. So I have several books that I'm working on blackout poetry, and blackout poetry is not as new as you would think. There's quite a history that I'm going to talk about in my blog about blackout poetry, and it's something that my students love to do. I know I keep talking about school, but it's something that I love to do as well. But you can get any newspaper or whatever, old book, and you just pick a page and you skim through the page and you find anchor words that you like the most. Really awesome anchor words that you want to connect together in some way to make a poem. And you underline those. Use pencil, please. Underline those words first, just in case you don't want those words anymore. But underline those words first. And then just kind of keep a vision of the words that you use. You could do as many anchor words as you want. It doesn't have to be 2, 3. You can do as many as you want. Words that you think would be cool to whatever you're going to do. And then you go back and you fill in underline with the connector words to make a sentence, make a story, make a poem of some sort. And once you have those underlined, then go back and kind of put like a circle around them or a box around them, and then you get to destroy the page. You get a Sharpie or any kind of color and blank out the rest of the words to where all you see are the words that you underlined and put a circle around.
Very cool. Very cool.
And, and you can just do it randomly and then go back and be like, hey, I actually did make a cool poem. I had no clue that I was going to do this. And I've done it different ways. Even if you think that you're not making a poem, once you have everything blacked out, you'll realize that I actually did make a poem. And it's one of the easiest ways to get started in poetry, and also one of the funnest ways, because if you go online and look at the different types of blackout poetry, people will go in old books and they will make designs with their poetry. Of course, that's more of like a advanced art method, but especially
I've
if
seen
you
those
do,
where they have like a picture, the words form a picture.
Yeah, the words will
sort.
form a picture, or they draw a picture over the words, subject matter, and especially if you're like really into mixed media forms of art, it's a really cool way to merge poetry and art.
Very cool, very cool.
And there's also something similar called a found poem. And that would be just cutting out words from a magazine and just kind of throwing them down and turning them into
we
a
did on our
poem.
vision
on
board.
my vision boards.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
exactly like a
I love
vision
doing
board.
I
that.
like those as
So
well.
you're making poetry and you didn't even know you were.
Yeah.
And there are also, I took a workshop on poetry several years ago, and you can also do something called book spine poetry, and I'll post pictures of this on my blog as well. It's where you can go to your bookshelf and grab any kind of random books and stack them on top of each other and make a poem using the spines of the books.
The titles,
cool.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, the titles,
of
yeah,
the book.
yeah,
Yes.
the words on the spine, so to speak. There's many different ways to make poetry that's not just sitting down and writing it.
That's very cool.
I like the idea of incorporating it into my art. Like with the, vision boards and stuff. I really enjoyed that. And I liked, last year I didn't purchase the class for One Little Word. I just kind of like tagged along with what everyone else was doing after they posted it. So whenever they wrote a poem, I didn't have all of the guidance and prompts and stuff. I just sat down with my word because my word was less and the, counter word with it was more. So I wrote a word about how they kind of like fight and tug each other like internally with myself. And I was like kind of blown away because my poem, when I read it, it makes myself cry because I'm like, it's so true, and I enjoyed that. And I'm like, I can't wait. I hope we get to do poems again this year because I want to add that into my One Little Word and into my art journaling and stuff because I like to kind of wreck other books. I like to take old textbooks and stuff and like, paint the pages with
well, it's better to do that
think
than
of the
throw
word
them away or
white,
giving them away to...
I paint them white.
Gesso,
thank you. I was like, goulash.
Wow.
The word goulash kept. This is why I don't write poetry.
She's hungry.
This is why I'm not a poet because I get the words all mixed up. But
Mix up the words.
I like the thought of like painting and then writing my poem on top of that. I think that would be cool.
Yeah. I like doing a lot of things like that too. I incorporate writings of all kinds in all of my art, and I incorporate art into my writing. So, for me, they all just kind of blend together because they're all forms of art.
But you're right. It's like a story without having like chapter after chapter of getting to the point. You can use these choice select words like Shakespeare did, to narrow the words down but still evoke that emotion and that story and get your point across with less words, more meaning.
Yes.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah. And when once you look at it that way, like a poem, a song is a story, just a little tiny short story, then you can definitely get into it more.
Yeah.
And, it's like, hey, this is telling me a story. It's not the conventional way, but it is telling me a story, just like Langston Hughes is telling the story of dreams being deferred.
Right. And what happens to them.
Yeah, and what does happen to them after they leave and go away.
So, yes, very profound. And
so next week, I think we're going to talk about COVID journals, or 2 years out of COVID, because the anniversary
of the lockdown in Texas, yes,
is.
So we're going to talk about no political stuff. I promise we're not going to talk political stuff.
Just stuff that we did during lockdown that helped us cope.
Well, and some of the repercussions that we're dealing with emotionally right now. Some of the things that are still that we're still coping with.
Yeah,
but no talk about politics, no vaccines, no
talk about
no masks,
actual COVID or anything like that. Yeah. We're just going to talk about things that we did during lockdown to
help us
out.
Yeah. So and we'll talk more about that next week. And
so be sure to check us out on the blog.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
We
have
our chat.
We have content always loading up on our website and our blog.
Yes.
On our
more
other
videos have been coming out, so go check us out. Follow us on all forms of social media. We don't have, all forms of social media.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere,
and we have content almost every day. Something. So
something almost every day coming out. So check us out.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank Red Door Studios and Creative Audio Tech. And we want to thank all you listeners for coming back. And we want to thank you new listeners for listening through to the end.
Yeah.
and we hope you come back next week, because we always have different topics every week. Sometimes we circle back to topics we've talked about. And sometimes the topic that we're talking about that you think is not related actually winds up circling back to a topic that is related. So
because the
you
wheel
just never know.
Goes in full circle. The wheel of fortune goes in full circle.
It does, and it's always in motion. So, come back.
Sorry,
I was thinking tarot cards.
Well, that too.
I was thinking of the omnivorous or whatever, the snake.
Oh yeah.
See how our minds go.
We are a little bit cray cray. Okay, so that's it for this week. We'll be back next week.
Bye. Have a great one, guys.
Bye.